This is presentation on, you can say, communism to pragmatism. So please, Giang. Please give him a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Giang. I'm a deputy fellow from ISEAS Ishak-Yusof in Singapore, and I'm also a visiting scholar with the US-Vietnam Research Center with a very kind invitation from the Cuong. And so you can say that I'm a doubtful academic visitor, so which makes me very, I think, fitting to discuss about very important doubt as well happened 2 years ago when Vietnam and US entered the comprehensive strategic partnership. I think it's very important because if we think about Vietnam's policy making process, they're normally very cautious. So when US and Vietnam entered the CSP, it was a big leap from a comprehensive partnership in 2013 when President Truong and President Obama at the time signed the agreement for Vietnam and US to officially enter the comprehensive partnership. So basically, the CSP between Vietnam and China makes the US in Vietnam's diplomatic hierarchy as important as traditional partners in China and Russia. So, which is very fitting because just a few, I think, a generation ago, most of Vietnamese leaders still consider as the US as a barbaric enemy. And just only a few, maybe 20 years later, they consider themselves as the best friends. So I think it's, for me, I think it's, that poses a very important puzzle, like how does one party communist state like Vietnam embrace the capitalist flag bearer without rupturing the ideology within the one party state, which is very important because it's not just about diplomacy, but how to preserve the ideology purity of the party when they always consider these socialism versus capitalism as a main legitimating tool of the state. So basically for that, I would try to address like 3 main questions in these presentations. The first one is that how did the Vietnamese Communist Party reconcile socialist ideology with CSP with the United States? And second, what role did Nguyen Phu Trọng play in this transformation, which I will explain later why I focus mostly on Nguyen Phu Trọng. And the last, what mechanisms enable the doctrinal adaptation without regime change or regime rupture in terms of ideology, which I think is very important because in one party state you control the narrative, you control the discourse. But if your narrative is not consistent, that would pose a lot of risks in terms of regime unrest, which happened basically in Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev. And there are a few existing explanations on why Vietnam and US upgraded the bilateral tie to the CSP in September 2023. The first one is factional politics. So basically, there's a push and pull between the conservatives and the reformists, which is quite convenient when we explain a very opaque political system in Vietnam. But I think that not fully explain why the upgrade actually happened in during the period of the most conservative leader of all, Nguyen Phu Trọng. The second approach is strategic culture of Vietnam, which means that it's upgraded just because of the historical experience of Vietnamese political culture and the way that we always try to extend our hand to our former enemies. But that also did not really explain why the upgrade happened right now, not 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And there is also very convenient way of explaining this through zero political realism. So in a way that it's about structural constraints and about China, about how Vietnam needs to engage the US because it wants to balance against China, which is I think it's very, very reasonable. But at the same time, it doesn't explain how the Communist Party of Vietnam convinced the domestic audience, which including the 5 million party members and the 100 million Vietnamese populations about, a few years ago they considered them as barbaric enemy, and now they said, well, now it's over, we are best friends. It's not, it doesn't work like that in terms of ideology. So I argue that the missing piece in explaining this double upgrade between Vietnam and US is ideology, and which I think is about how revolutionary ideology has developed, as both constraints and the resources for policy innovation. Which, if you want to know more about this topic, you can read Professor Truong, Communist Revolution, in a very interesting book published in 2016. I argue that ideology is a dynamic process of continuous adaptation among elites. So it's not fixed between conservative or reformist. So a conservative leader like Nguyen in terms of ideology, he can be a reformist in some sense when situations or context change. So it's very important for us to see it as a dynamic process, not as a fixed session on ideology of the stakeholders. And then there is a part dependence of rhetorical action. So in a way, when the leaders of a communist state in Vietnam say something like, we respect human rights, we want to diversify our partnership, maybe they didn't at that time have really a genuine intention to do so, but because they speak out these words, so later on it's created kind of a part dependence. So other reformist leaders later on can glean on this word and say, well, actually, when actually Ho Chi Minh said that 10 years ago, so now we just follow that path. So it's easier, and it kind of created constraints on the ideology to go back to the conservative when you speak out these rhetorical words in terms of promoting diversification or promoting integration later on. So my approach is mostly constructivist. Basically, I try to process trace the causal mechanisms linking ideological legitimacy to foreign policy outcomes, focusing mostly on one key leader, which I think very important, because mostly when we think about Vietnamese politics, we compare with China, for example. We always think that Vietnam is collective leadership system. So mostly it's a faceless, political culture in a way that we don't really focus a lot on one individual. But I think Nguyen plays an extremely important role in Vietnamese foreign policy and domestic policy, obviously, in the past 30 years. Because his whole career went parallel with Vietnam's foreign policy transformation. He was first elected to the Central Committee in 1991 as editor-in-chief of the Discourse. And then later on he moved to other very important positions, which make him a very key decision maker in terms of foreign policy. Including the chairman of the Central Theoretical Council, and then later on the chairman of the National Assembly, and obviously the 3 terms, unprecedented 3 terms as a sensei of the Communist Party of Vietnam. And so, for example, here is a very interesting picture of him when he first was a journalist, editor-in-chief of the Discourse. Very innocent face, which behind him was very, I would say, a master of political maneuvering. Obviously, when we talk about that, we talk about the anti-corruption campaign, but also about how he handled foreign policy as well. And here is 2001 when he was the chairman of the Central Theoretical Council, which is very important because that set the tone of ideology in Vietnam in that position. And here, obviously, 2021, when he was the last term of the Nguyen as a sensei of the VCP. So I focus mostly on 3 main sort of evidence. First one is the party documents to trace the official ideological revolutions and positions and evolutions. And then theoretical journals to identify how ideologues frame policies within the doctrines. I focus mostly on 3 main party journals. The first one is Legitimation. Second one is Discourse. And the last one, obviously, when talking about books with Ishak. I dream of publishing books, and if I ever have my books like shaped nicely, this shape would be very interesting. And yeah, I think it's very important to focus on their speeches. Like I said, rhetorical action, even though they didn't mean that, but because they set this kind of like a motion, and for whatever policy later on, when they try to other reformists want to engage, it's easier for them to do so. And so first, before I move to the Truong area, it's important to set the stage for his rise. So I will discuss a little bit about the free Truong area, what I consider as a reactive pragmatism without doctrine. So basically, like many of our panelists also discuss about the crisis of the 80s in Vietnam and how Vietnam was so desperate to open their economy to reach out to whoever possible to solve the economic crisis in Vietnam. And at that point, the official position of the Politburo was that they tried to change from the ideologically based diplomacy. They said that in key resolution to political economic based diplomacy. So in a way that they recognize that it's important to just do not really do policy based on ideology anymore. But obviously it's a way to talk, it's a rhetorical action, but it's not what they actually did, because in 89, there was a Tiananmen protests, and which caused a big, I think, tremor in Vietnam, because they're really concerned about what similar things will happen in Hanoi. And then obviously in 91, when the Soviet collapsed, and they're really concerned about whatever Western plots could happen in Vietnam, could bring down the communist regime in the country. And so we've seen a lot of setbacks and oscillations between opening up the economy and the foreign policy and maintaining a worldview of địch and ta, the friend and foe binary in the process. And so geopolitical necessity forced Vietnam to integrate into the regional, in terms of joining ASEAN in 95 and then normalizing with China and with the US. But still, primarily, it's because it's a lack of viable alternatives. It's not they really wanted to do so, but they have no other options. And so because of that, there's a lack of coherent doctrine. What I think Professor Thuy also said, ideological schizophrenia. I always struggle to pronounce it. But basically it's about deeper economic integration with capitalist states, which providing the primary market for them, but really still cautioning against Western subversion, which I think until 2003, when there is a new strategy of fatherland defense in this situation, or bảo vệ Tổ quốc trong tình hình mới, they still consider the Western subversion as a very key concern for the party and for the national, actually, because we think about the regional regime security, but it's also about the national security, because they consider Western invasion of Vietnam is not really a remote possibility, but it's real. And so for the Nguyen Phu Trong era, the first, when he was not in power, he's a staunch Marxist. So basically he also shaped the discussion of Vietnam's ideological schizophrenia at that time. But when he became the party secretary in 2000, the first time in 2011, his view shifted a little bit to more pragmatism. I just move on a little bit quickly because you doesn't like the space of my speech. Yeah. Anyway, so when he became the party secretary, he first the national state before socialism, which is a big thing for him, because when you read the political report of the party in 2011, they drop all the rhetoric about supporting global, revolutionary movement, but put their interest of the national state first, which I think is also a very big moment for Nguyen Phu Trong. But still, he supported multilateralism and diversification. But he also always cautioned against the West. So in a way, he knows that it's important to have deeper engagement with the West, but he's still very concerned about peaceful evolution. And he maintained a very deep trust with China, and he visited a lot during this time, and so engaged in deep theoretical discussion with Xi Jinping later on. But I argue that the Hải Giang or in Vietnam is HD981 is a big juncture, and many of our panelists also discuss it. So I didn't have to speak more about that. Basically, it's forced profound reconsideration of the link between national security and regime security. So before, the West was considered as both the threat to national and to regime security, but now China become something like a primary threat in terms of national security, not regional security when you think about the West previously. So basically, rhetoric shifted very sharply during this time. At first, he was a bit silent, but then in May, when Nguyen was very vocal about, we do not exchange our sovereignty for, some kind of illusionary friendship with China, he changed his rhetoric because he knows that, if you don't, it would be really impossible for him to really regain his trust among the party elites and so among the population at that time. So that break, I think, the ideological taboos, because then later on he became the first Gen Z to visit US the next year. Obviously, before that, he also visited Beijing, and then later on Xi Jinping come to Hanoi in 2015 as well. But in a way, he signaled that Vietnam is now willing to jump ahead of the ideological constraint. So it actually marks the end of China's primary in Vietnam foreign policy, which is a very crucial moment. And so in two last terms, his supremacy after beating the rival in 2016, he had more time to consider his legacy, including the domestic one is anti-corruption campaign, and the other one is bamboo diplomacy. The first time he mentioned it is in 2016, and later on in 2021, he had more time to refine the metaphor as deep roots, solid trunk, and flexible branches. So basically, it has nothing to do with communism, but now it has a lot of things to do with pragmatism. So it's a kind of a hybrid framework, like combining many elements of contemporary middle power, reconfiguration of their foreign policy, which is very interesting because leader plays a massive authority, you see. And there are three main strategies that Nguyen used and his team to justify for the double upgrade. The first one is how he interprets interests over ideology using Marx. So we say that Marx says that people pursue their interests. So basically, it's important for Vietnam to also pursue its interests because Marx says so. And then cultural framing is flexible because our culture is about the bamboos we bend without breaking. So it's not something out of our, alien of our culture, but it's something that, deep in the thousands years of history of Vietnam. And then, very important, Ho Chi Minh's legacy. It's important because when he reached out to the US, we reached out to the US. He said, well, Ho Chi Minh, in the 40s, also reached out to OSS or CA at that time, and we use a lot of reference in the Independence Declaration. So why now? So if you're against going with the US, you're against Ho Chi Minh, which is obviously a big thing for party terrorists in Vietnam. But obviously, it's also very developing concept because very interesting if you follow Tô Lâm rhetoric, because in the past year, he never said one word about bamboo diplomacy. So that is one a lot of way for us to explain this. But I think it's very interesting because he always emphasized strategic autonomy. Maybe he doesn't like bamboo, maybe he wants another botanical, metaphor like banyan or whatsoever, but he doesn't use this bamboo diplomacy anymore. In fact, we used once or twice, but not so long. And maybe we move to technocratic or less ideological, which is possible if we think about the way that Tô Lâm is an extremely pragmatic leader, but time will tell, especially after the next party congress. So here's some timeline for the change of self-transformation and self-evolution from an orthodox party terrorist to a more pragmatic leader, and using, I would say, conceptual stretching, selective emphasis on different aspects of their theories, and about indigenous synthesis of using bamboos, using historical reference to that. And as a great, not great, but as an American would say, thank you for the attention to this matter, and look forward to this session.
Thank you so much, and that was amazing, exactly on time. So I'm very honored as well to introduce our next speaker, Thuy Nguyen from the U.S. Vietnam Research Center of the University of Oregon, to present a paper on Vietnamese geo-perception.
I take a little credit for.
Give Thuy a round of applause. Oh, I didn't realize was it there the whole time?
Good morning. So I'm going to talk about, we switch here a little bit, talk about the youth perception and understanding and their interpretation of the Vietnam Wars and its policy through an online discussion forum, Reddit. Although Vietnam War is one of the most studied conflict in the last 100 years, but much less attention has been given to the understanding of the youth and their interpretation of the Vietnam War and its legacy. So my research asked 3 questions. First, how do young Vietnamese interpret the Vietnam War? And second, how do intergenerational dialogue shape their identity and understanding? And the third, what role do online platform play in the collective memory? However, the challenge is in asking this question is the data on public opinion, and especially for this segment of demographic, the youth, is nearly non-existent. We just simply don't have a public survey or public opinion on this particular topic and this particular audience. So I turned to a resource. I turned to Reddit, which is a US-based online discussion forum to exploit the data. So I turned to the subreddit Vietnam, which has 1.4 million active members. So I scraped all the discussion in this forum and filter out 385 questions related to Vietnam War, and tied with that are 17,000 comments go along with these questions. And go along with that is all the metadata related to the upvotes, the downvotes, the star that audience give to this post and these comments. And all of this discussion is in English, which is, I would say, an advantage in this case, because we can say this is less subjective to domestic censorship, or like AK-47, which is the propaganda arm. So by collecting and processing this data, hopefully this is one of the large-scale corpora of language of this kind of public opinion, and I'm very happy to share with any grad student here who needs data to write a paper on this. So I apply semantic and sentiment analysis. I calculate the polarity of the posts and the comments. I calculate the subjectivity from 0 to 1, whether it's factual or it's like too emotional. And also I rely on the heuristic classifications to realize if the post or the comments provoking is neutral or it's the fair inquiry. This approach allows us to move away from anecdotes toward more systematic analysis of the patterns of opinions. So generally, for the post, mostly we see neutral and curious attitude of the person who asked the question. So we see here the calculation for the average polarity is 0.1, which is slightly positive. The mean for subjectivity, which is that people tend to be moderately opinionated. Almost half of the posts potentially using the provoking language. However, only less than However, we have close to 40% neutral. I will put 40% neutral, which is 60% not so neutral in the way that they ask the question. But overall, for those who ask the question, it's more like a desire to know and from curiosity. But when it comes to the comments, it's more a mixture of feelings. We see that there's a mixture of respect. We see critics, occasionally like anger or provoking language. However, overall, the calculation still shows that the tone leaning toward positive attitude. And even in disagreement, often also contain in the call for respect and understanding. So that was the overall analysis of the whole corpus. Now I will introduce 4 occurring themes and show you the story behind that. Each of the themes offer a unique window into how the young Vietnamese see the war and its legacy. So the first theme is a feeling about the war. We see that when discussing about this topic, we see both the person who asks and the commenters often dissociate themselves from the war itself and guide toward focusing more on the current issues. And interestingly, they offer critiques from here and there of the Western-centric framing. So here's a question, for example, the question, how do Vietnamese people living in Vietnam feel about the Vietnam War? And these are some typical answers. Unless they're very old, they're more likely to be resentful of the subsidy economy rather than the war. Or another person say they don't care much. Ask them about how they feel about China instead. And interestingly, the third comment here, which war? Damn Western-centric train of thought. There have been war for 2,000 years. I think you were talking about the American War. There was a French one, there was several Chinese one and a Japanese one. So the young people, this is obviously outside of the academic world. They start to ask a question about the dominance of the Western thinking framework. The second theme is about the symbolism flags, the North and the South, and this is to my surprise. I was thinking that when talking about this contentious topic, that would be more provoking language, but contrary to that, I found that the tone are quite respectful, empathetic, and for some Northerners, there will be less hostility toward yellow flag, and the Southerners, they share experience balancing family memory with reconciliation, and overall it's a shift toward mutual understanding. A caveat here though, that I wouldn't think the Force 47, which is the propaganda force, engage in this kind of discussion so much. So that's why we don't see so much of the hateful discussion regarding the flags. So here, the prompt is help me understand South Vietnam flag, and the person who asked the question also put a note. No trolling, please. I am here for respectful discussion. And this question received a lot of comments along with that. The person from Hanoi said, I got my education in public school and was brainwashed. The yellow flag originated from Nguyen dynasty is actually quite respected among general population, as I see. So she or he provide a personal view in this context. And here's another commenter from the South. My entire family was raised with the Southern flag. And when I grew up, I didn't even know that Vietnam actually had another flag that was different from the one that I knew. Now I'm in high school. I realize that there are people that love their nation and stand under that flag. This discussion, this discourse was to my surprise. Another recurring theme is this fall of Saigon. And on this topic, I must say that there's still divisive, and there's still distrust from the southern diaspora towards the north, and also the accusation of propaganda and revisionism. So here, the person who posted a screenshot of an article published by The Atlantic on the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and then asked, what do you think? So here, the people in the comment will share their stories. So here are the two stories. One said, my girlfriend from the grandma from the south still won't step foot in the north to this day, because she doesn't trust them and still thinks she will get abducted. Crazily, nothing culturally has really changed. So that's one. Another commenter said, I almost feel bad for the northerners there. They have a little to nothing that they do not steal from the south. Their schools lie to them, the museums are full of lies, and half-truth propaganda is the only thing the North is good at making. So clearly, the perceptions of betrayal and mistrust persist. The last theme I want to share today, this is a very interesting prompt. So the person posts this picture, and this is a picture taken in Hanoi, I guess, in the protest against China. And the person, without asking a question, just make a statement, the idea reunification for me. And then there's a lot of comments going along with that. And also, to my surprise, given having already read other comments, the consensus among the commenters is impossible. There's no way this picture can be realized. The two Vietnams and the US, the sum of them will be bigger than China, like the unity of these three forces going against China. So the consensus is impossible, no way. So here are some quotes. All the decisions made about Vietnam was not made in Saigon, but in the Oval Office. You don't think that's treason? The other one is, that's just made the situation worsen, isn't it? Receiving aid and consequently influence from such aid from a traditional enemy. So these debates show the younger people how they are trying to grapple with what reunification means, what reconciliation means, what joining force means in facing today's problem, and who has the legitimacy in making the decisions. So they use their understanding, the feeling of the past of the war and different forces, and think about today's problem. Of course, there's no clear answer, but this is like a sneak peek into the youth thinking, linking the war, its legacy, and the problem that they have to face today. So across all of these themes, what struck me was that even in the ambit of disagreement, there was often empathy, a willingness to acknowledge the other side, multiple perspectives, and the war is not forgotten in any way, but we see that the war is being reinterpreted in the new lens of the young people. So, of course, there are limitations in this study and approach. Reddit's users are obviously not representative for all younger Vietnamese. However, this kind of approach promises one thing, that in combination with surveys, interviews, and other qualitative research, it can shed light into the study of the youth. So this study has four major implications, I would suggest. The first is about memory and identity. We see throughout these stories that family histories, family backgrounds remain central to how the war is understood among the youth. Second, the narratives keep evolve over time. The younger generations, they do inherit the memories from older people. However, they are an actor in this story as well. They keep reshaping the narratives about the war and its legacy. And next, about the online platform, we see that with the lack of public survey and the public forum about the opinions, that we see that online platforms are filling the void left by this lack. And I would suggest that the digital discussion like Reddit or others can offer a new window into the Vietnamese collective memory. Thank you. Welcome all the.
Excellent. So last but not least, we have a paper that's co-authored by Nguyễn Cuong from McGill University and Hoang Thanh from University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Ho Chi Minh City. And Hoang Thanh will present the paper today. Please give her a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And I also thank you for the Center of Southeast Asia Study and US-Vietnam Research Center for organizing a wonderful symposium. And my name is Thanh, and on behalf of my team, Nguyen, who is also my co-author, who could not show up today, I will share with you our research findings on how Vietnamese youth to see the US as a vital partner and a potential threat. Here's my research question. Our research question: why do Vietnamese youth feel the US as a vital partner and a political threat? And the question raised when we look at the relationship between the US and the Vietnam, and when the upgrading to the comprehensive partnership in 2023, and this upgrade reflects the Vietnamese leadership recognition of the US economic strength and global leadership, and also the U.S. role in the Vietnam relation with the major power. Also, in the 2024 State of the Southeast Asia survey reveals that a paradox. On one hand, Vietnam ranks second among Asian nations. On one hand, Vietnam ranks second among Asian nations in terms of public trust for the US. On the other hand, Vietnamese respondents show skepticism regarding cultural political alignments. This raises us the issue: why do relatively few Vietnamese citizens perceive compatibility between the two nation political cultures? And why does public perception of bilateral relationships shift when it comes to the political issue? So our research seeks to address this issue by looking at the way the Vietnamese youth, perceive the relationship between the US and Vietnam, and the US also. This is our framework and methods. Based on the analysis of the official government document and interview of the 51 college students, our research seeks to unpack the complexity. We examine the party documents on the peaceful evolution and on geopolitical pragmatic, and at the points thanks to Giang, he also had the wonderful presentation on the geopolitical pragmatics of Vietnam. So we try to understand how Vietnamese Communist Party intends public citizens to perceive the US and Vietnam relationship and the American political system in this discourse. Then we conduct a focus group interview with 51 college students to understand what to extent they have internalized these narratives of the government. Throughout our textual analysis of people's evolution and discourse on the geopolitical pragmatism, we found out that the dual perception to see the U.S. as both a vital partner and potential political threat is not accidentally. It's the result of the competing narrative that Vietnamese government used to frame the relationship. The first is geopolitical pragmatism that presents Vietnam as a peace-loving, neutral country that is ready to be friends with all the countries regardless of the political system. It emphasized the pragmatic approach focused on the economic and security cooperation. And the second narrative is peaceful evolution. It's more cautionary. It framed the U.S. and the Western side and the democratic values as a sort of ideological threat, a non-violent conspiracy to undermine Vietnamese, to undermine Vietnam's socialist order. So these are our findings. When we interviewed the students, their views on the pragmatic role of the relationship were overwhelmingly positive. Students see the U.S. a critical partner for Vietnam's future, and from the economic perspective, they are optimistic about attracting U.S. investment, technology, and they recognize the U.S. as Vietnam's largest export market. And geopolitically, they believe a strong relationship with the U.S. will enhance the Vietnam national standing or status. Now, state status. In Vietnam, they say vị trí của Việt Nam trên information is already international community, and and have a good relationship with the U.S. will provide a crucial counterbalance politically in the region with rising tension. Additionally, they also show the concern with the rise of China's powerful neighbor country Vietnam, and their concern contributes to a mixed perception of the U.S. and Vietnam military ties. On one hand, the student believe that the cooperation with the U.S. would help Vietnam preserve peace and stability in the South China Sea, and the U.S. would support Vietnam in enhancing its maritime security and defense capability. On the other hand, when we ask about the potential disadvantage of closer ties with the U.S., the student reveal significantly concerned. They're concerned about China. They're concerned that China may become displeased with Vietnam because of Vietnam's closer tie with the U.S. They're also concerned the relationship with Russia. And even they also concern the relationship the relationship between Vietnam and Asian countries, and they share their feeling that pushing and enhancing the relationship with the U.S. will make all the Southeast Asian countries wary of Vietnam because Vietnam is pulling the U.S. to the region. As the result, the student concluded that if Vietnam were to advance its relationship with the U.S., be careful, and Vietnam should consider the language used in diplomatic discourse and official document. Vietnam should be useful, and they observe that Vietnam could depend on diplomatic and political with the U.S. only when required. If Vietnam is khi cần thiết, có quan hệ tốt với Mỹ khi cần thiết, but otherwise prefer to focus on economic relations. In terms of peaceful operation and the threat, although the confidence about the future of U.S.-Vietnam relations is overwhelming positive, it is tempered by the significant concern. At this point, we see that the peaceful evolution narrative has deeply influenced their view on American style democracy. The interview data reveal a conflict in the young perception. While they aspire the personal freedom that the American promoting, they aspire the political system that has a lot of freedom of speech. They aspire the American educational system that provides an environment for different opinions and critical thinking for students to strive. They express anxiety that these values could lead to social instability, political chaos, and an errors of traditional Vietnamese cultural values like family bonding and community love. I would like to quote their sharing. One student explained, if Vietnam follow the US in granting excessive individual freedom, it will narrow the connection between people. Adopting this could erode our ASEAN cultural values of unity and family love and support. One participant also affirmed that Vietnam should not encourage American cultural values like excessive freedom that go beyond what our society can accept, such as protest. Protest can create chaos in political life, or the use of guns and influence of American-style media that infiltrates the entertainment industry. This could harm the spiritual lives of young Vietnamese who lack strong political awareness. Strong political awareness is Vietnamese quan điểm chính trị. In this regard, we asked them directly whether they consider the U.S. as a threat to Vietnam based on their description and understanding of peaceful evolution. At this point, I want to explain a little bit about the educational system in Vietnam. For the very first beginning of the first year, all the students in the public university and college, they have to learn a defense education, giáo dục quốc phòng, and they have to learn about the peaceful evolution. So that's the reason why they understand what the meaning of the peaceful evolution and the narrative of the peaceful evolution officially. And when asked them whether they consider the US as a threat to Vietnam, their response was not uniform. There are three groups. The first group believe that the US poses a direct threat which perfectly aligns with the peaceful evolution narrative of the government. Some reject the idea that US is a threat to Vietnam. Others believe that now the US may not be a direct threat, but it could be potential danger in the long term. Regardless of whether they agree or disagree with the idea that the US is a threat to Vietnam, they also say the viewpoint on the government prevention strategy. When I asked them, what do you think the Vietnamese government should do to prevent the threat, they all share the same strategy. They explain that they use the phrase misleading information. Because of misleading information, the Vietnamese citizens and people oppose the Vietnamese government. Because the Vietnamese citizens lack sufficient understanding about Vietnam, so they will be affected by peaceful evolution and they oppose the government. So the strategy to prevent the threat, they all agree that the government should control information over the media and cyberspace to prevent spreading misleading information in Vietnam. Thông tin sai lệch, misleading information on the government policy, on the government action or intention, behavior. And the way that can prevent the misleading information is that the government needs to educate students and the youth on peaceful evolution. That is their sharing. And so, how do these two seemingly positive views coexist in the view of the student on the US and the US-Vietnam relationship? The answer lies in the government's ability to successfully compartmentalize the relationship. They have created a system where economic and security cooperation can flourish under the umbrella of geopolitical pragmatism, while ideological boundaries and dogmatic stability are maintained by the peaceful evolution narrative. This allows Vietnam to engage with a democratic superpower without compromising its own political system. before jumping to our conclusion, I would like to share with you my reflect on the interview with the student. I feel that when they talk about the relationship between the US and Vietnam, the sentiment is that don't be too hot, don't be too cold, just the right amount. And the right amount is that they prioritize the internal order and stability. And it's why I share with the viewpoint of Khac's presentation. Regardless of what the government do, they have and they must remain the stability and order domestically is the main point. Yeah, when I listen to the discussion among the groups of 3 or 5 students. Yeah, and now I jump to the conclusion. Yeah, and so we can see that the perception of Vietnamese youth as so sophisticated blend of optimism and caution. They are pragmatic about the benefits of cooperation with the US, bringing to Vietnam. They aspire the educational system, the investment, the economic benefits that have a good relationship with the US will bring to Vietnam. But they also ideologically vigilant about the American influence on the Vietnam society. And this reflects, I can say that the masterful policy act by the Vietnamese government to navigate the complex geopolitical landscape, not just the hedging and the balancing act with the major power, the Vietnamese government also have the good balancing act to navigate the paradox inside Vietnam with the people, with the student, in this case, in our research. Thank you so much.